Welcome to Season 3 of Planet Poetry.
I'm Robin Houghton.
And I'm Peter Kenny. It's really nice of you to join us. This episode, our special guest for the season's opener is Kim Moore, talking about her Forward Prize shortlisted collection, All the Men I Never Married.
Plus, Peter and I will be having our usual banter about what we've been doing and reading over the summer break.
So to get us rolling, let's hear Robin's interview with Kim Moore.
Kim Moore's pamphlet, If We Could Speak Like Wolves, was a winner in the 2011 Poetry Business Pamphlet Competition. Her first collection, The Art of Falling, from Sarin in 2015, won the Geoffrey Faber Memorial Prize. And her second collection, All the Men I Never Married, also from Sarin, 2021, is currently shortlisted for the Forward Prize for Best Collection. Kim is a lecturer in creative writing at Manchester Metropolitan University. So, Kim Moore, welcome to Planet Poetry.
Hi, thanks for having me.
We're going to be talking today mainly about your Forward Prize shortlisted collection, All the Men I Never Married. Now, when is the result coming out for this? I keep looking on the web and there's no sign of it on the Forward Prize's website. Do you know?
I think, I'm looking in my diary now if you can hear rustling. It's 28th of November, I think. Yes. Yeah, and it's in Manchester this year instead of London, so that's convenient for me.
Yeah. So the title of this book, when I read this, it made me think about, Tracy Emin's Bed, all the men I ever slept with. I wonder if by way of introduction you could read the opening poem, because there's sort of a prologue poem at the beginning, isn't there, before the numbered poems. Do you want to start with that?
Yeah, so this is the only poem in the book that's not called All the Men I Never Married, followed by a number. I wrote it pretty much at the beginning, quite near the beginning of starting to write the book, as part of my PhD research. And I remember having a discussion with my supervisor who said this poem should go at the end of the poems. Oh. And I put it there for quite a while, and then I just felt so uncomfortable. I was just thinking about the poem as well, that it's the only poem using the pronoun we.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, because I was trying to experiment with, as soon as you use we, it's problematic, isn't it? Because you're speaking for other people.
And the reader, yeah.
And whenever we try and speak for all women, it's problematic because women are various, and I wanted to try and risk it. We are coming under cover of darkness, with our strawberry marks, our familiars. Our third nipples, our ill-mannered bodies, our childhoods spent hobbled like horses, where we were told to keep our legs closed, where we sat in the light of a window and posed and waited for the makers of the world to tell us again how a woman is made. We are arriving from the narrow places, from the spaces we were given, with our curses and our spells and our solitude, with our potions we swallow to shrink as small as insects or stretch us into giants. For yes, there are giants amongst us, we must warn you. There will be riots. We're carrying all that we know about silence as we return from the forests and towers, unmaking ourselves, stepping from the pages of books, from the eye of the camera, from the cages we built for each other, the frames of paintings, from every place we were lost and afraid in. We stand at the base of our own spines and watch tree turn to bone and climb each vertebrae to crawl back into our minds. We've been out of our minds all this time, our bodies saying no, we were not born for this, dragging the snare and the wire behind us.
Well, I think it's interesting that you were, first of all, it was suggested to you to put this poem at the end, because I agree with you. In the position that it's intriguing, and it has this kind of big mythic feel to it, doesn't it? That kind of, it's a vast landscape that's being played out here. And now I'm reading it again, a lot of the themes that come again and again through about bodies and silence and parts of bodies. And there's that line about the cages we built for each other. There's as much about women and how women see each other. It's not just the male gaze, it's the women's gaze on the women. I wondered if you might read numbers 11 and 12. They're two prose poems that kind of go together back to back, don't they? And I think there's something that goes on in number 12 that I think a lot of poets will be able to relate to.
All the Men I Never Married, number 11. Once I knew a man who thought he knew everything. I often returned from work to find him asleep in my bed. It was like the sun had slipped itself between the sheets, or a lion, or something else born golden and sure of itself. Even though I knew all the stories about finding people in your bed, how it always ended badly, the 3 bears, the little girl with the red cape, what could I do but climb in beside him? He must have spent hours shaving his chest and back so that women like me could slide along him, as if we were bodies of water, and he the dry and thirsty earth. The man who thought he knew everything never learnt that he didn't, and I realised too late. This was why he was the way he was, as if he'd been touched and turned to gold by a foolish, laughing king. All the Men I Never Married, number 12. After the reading, a man waits around to tell me the poem I read about a beautiful man who thought he knew everything was objectifying men. How would it feel if the gender of the protagonist was reversed, he says triumphantly. I reply that it would feel like most other love poems in the course of human history. He says, aha, so this is really a very ordinary subject. I say, yes, if you discount subversion and poetic tradition and female desire. More accurately, I only get to subversion and poetic tradition and female before he interrupts me to tell me how disappointed he is, as I'm a better writer than this, wasting my talent making cheap shots about men. The man in my poem does spend the whole poem naked, so maybe he is a little bit objectified, but I like him that way. I start to write a poem about the opinionated man who is busy shaking his head at my misunderstanding of beautiful men and their complex desires, which I've only skimmed over in my original poem by not giving my man a voice of his own, not allowing him to tell his own story. I'm about to make a general and sweeping statement about men when he interrupts again. Isn't the man in your poem a bit one-dimensional, he opines. Can't you make him more interesting? Just trying to be helpful, he says, holding his hands up like 2 little flags, like 2 dishcloths, like 2 dead moles hung on a fence. I reply, no, I can't. That is the best thing about him. Or maybe I'm just wishing I said that. Maybe I just smiled, nodded my head.
That's it, isn't it? It's, like the 2 dishcloths, 2 dead moles hung on a fence. I mean, where did that come from? I love that. That whole scenario, yeah. Just saying, just trying to be helpful. There's a number of poems that portray these microaggressions, and that ending, maybe I just smiled, nodded my head. You use that ending or versions of it quite a fair few times, don't you? This idea of actually it's easy just you know what, fine, just demur, just agree superficially, and then retreat into this kind of silence.
When I'm writing about these moments, I'm always trying to remember or work out why have I remembered that when it was just such an annoying exchange, but, it's not a big deal. I wasn't physically hurt or particularly emotionally traumatized. I was annoyed, but you remember those things. They're like little fish hooks stuck in your skin. And so the poem is me trying to work out why I've remembered that. And a lot of the poems, I ended up coming back to silence and feeling kind of going through these different emotions about silence, like feeling angry with myself for my own kind of what I was terming as complicity. I read something in Sarah Ahmed and just thinking about coping mechanisms with sexism and trying to reframe silence as, yes, it can be passivity, but it can also be resistance. It can be a kind of radical form of resistance, just not saying anything, or trying to think of silence as a tool that I use consciously, whereas before I would be using it unconsciously and then feeling cross about myself afterwards.
Yeah.
So I don't go around through my life now arguing with everyone that annoys me in a sexist, that's being sexist and, giving them what for. Sometimes I choose to just bite my tongue.
Yeah.
But the fact that I'm choosing now and it's not, that is through writing these poems. They've changed, they've changed me and changed the way that I can deal with this, with this stuff.
I wonder if poem number 26 are playing out of this idea of choosing silence. And you use the phrase, I think in that poem, a vow of silence. And that comes up later in the book as well, a vow of silence, like a positive thing.
I think that's a good example, which I hadn't thought about until you said about choosing to use silence in a different way and looking back at an experience and recognising that use of silence. Right, so this is All the Men I Never Married, number 26. Once I went on what he called a date, and I called driving around in his car, which had one of those exhausts that roared and made people turn and look as we drove down the street. The more we drove, the more I realised his personality didn't really suit the car, or maybe it did. Maybe that was the point. I was also young, and sometimes cruel, and because language had deserted him, I decided I also would not speak. I was annoyed at not sitting in a pub or eating a meal at a restaurant, even more annoyed when he pulled up outside McDonald's. So I made a vow of silence, though I was perfectly capable of speaking, though talking is something I enjoy. But I was tired of being kind to men, always making them feel better about themselves. I sat like a stone in his car, or a fish he would never hold in his hands. We watched the late-night swaggering of seagulls as they waited for scraps from groups of squealing teenagers who were squashed into neighbouring cars and clambering over each other like puppies. It wasn't his fault I was far away from all of that. How could he know I'd lived with violence and survived? I was only a shadow, pretending to be a woman in a car, a stone pretending to be a woman in the dark, or like somebody returning from a land nobody else could see, though its borders were under their noses, though its generals lived next door. I can't remember how I got home, or how the awkward silence was broken. I understood violence as something of love, never from a stranger or acquaintance. Years later he finds me online, sends a message. "Do you remember me? It's me, Jay. I'm sorry. I was so immature back then. I want to explain that I was a stone in the shape of a fish, the bones of a fish trapped in a stone, but I know it doesn't make any sense. God, I'm frightened for my daughter and the risks she will take." I write back, "No, you have nothing to apologise for."
At one point you say, it wasn't his fault, I was far away from all of that. And then we have this linking of violence and love. I was really sort of surprised by the ending. You're not forgiving him for something. You just weren't taking part in that scene. You weren't present almost in that scene. Am I reading that right?
I'm always interested in the space between. Irigaray calls it the between us. So rather than trying to write about a person and creating this subject-object relationship, trying to write about that space between us. And the space between us in this poem is just a blank hole because there was no kind of communication.
Yeah. I
didn't think he had anything to apologise for, but hearing you speak now, I was thinking, God, I felt grateful because he was just not a violent person. Like, I remember thinking, how could I have just got in a car with someone I didn't know and just driven off into the night? Like, if my daughter, when my daughter does that, I'm going to have a heart attack.
Yeah, which is, as you say at the end, suddenly you're thinking, God, I'm worried for my daughter. It's almost like it suddenly kind of hits you at that point.
Yeah, and then the bits in the middle about, where it takes that dark turn, I think it's me trying to work out what was missing, and part of it is this living through violence. I think when you've experienced violence, it changes you and it changes the way that you see the world. And even though I was young, I didn't feel like I was part of that kind of teenagery, young experience because I'd seen too much by that point.
I would like you to read number 30, if you would, which intrigued me because it felt almost like a sort of a healing poem, but I wasn't sure about that. So I think you should read it and then let's have a chat about it.
Okay. All the Men I Never Married, number 30. On the way from A wing to B wing, 2 prisoners start to circle each other on the long corridor they call the High Street, where the leaves gather in corners. They push their foreheads against each other, their arms thrown back behind them. The wind whistles past the canteen, past closed doors, through the high-grilled windows. A guard shoves me through a gate, a hand in the small of my back, locks it after us. We watch men emerge from cells and gather around the 2 still locked together. It's like an old black and white silent movie, except even the black is a washed-out grey. Their jumpers and jogging bottoms, the doors a darker shade, the walls an almost white, and just those leaves, bright spots of colour, stirring a little before they settle, brittle enough to turn to dust if I could touch them, and not a sound from the men watching, or the two who are swinging at each other. The alarm shrieks and prisoners drop to the ground like fallen trees, and we turn away. Our men are waiting in the prison library, with poems on scraps of paper in their pockets. Today Matt is leaving, and Jack reads a poem, tells him to never come back, forget they exist. And Joe smiles like he's forgotten how, and Luke says it rains in his mind all the time. And Arjun tells us about a country where battles were fought with poems instead of swords. They are listening, some with their eyes closed, their heads cradled in their arms, some with their eyes wide open. When the bell calls them back to cells, they walk out of the room and are transformed, back to fallen trees, or they become the wall and never leave, or they change into a scroll of barbed wire and no one ever touches them again, or they become the bars of a locked gate and cast their shadows on each other. They become the silence, they become the corridor, and men walk up and down inside.
The men who you're seeing, they're black and white versions of themselves, shadows of themselves, and then each of them by name, each of them reading something, and they become real people for that moment. And then back again, they become the barbed wire or the locked gate. Do you know the most chilling line in there for me was the hand in the small of my back. So it's sort of a disembodied hand, it's an anonymous hand. And I know the phrase comes in another poem, and it just gives me the chills. I think that might be just me, actually.
It's interesting hearing that reading because, poems, of course, they don't have to be true, do they?
No.
but this particular one, it's definitely based on memory, and that hand is a female hand, but I've deliberately not gendered in the poem. So it's interesting you assumed it was a man, but that moment of it was a hard shove because we were in danger because there was a fight about to happen.
Yeah.
So it was a very hard shove, and I've changed details in the poem. The guard in reality was a prison librarian who I was working with,
right.
who was a good friend of mine. I felt so kind of looked after in that moment.
Huh.
And it was all so silent because the prisoners who were fighting, they don't want the guards to see. And then my friend hit the alarm, and then as soon as the alarm goes off, they all have to drop to the floor so that they can see it's not them.
Right.
They can see where the trouble is. But I think, again, that experience in the prison changed my life. I felt, apart from that moment, I felt safer in the prison than I've ever felt walking into a pub as a young woman. The men were so respectful that it was like being in school because they call you miss. I think what I'm trying to write about is realising that those men in that prison, they're moving through a landscape of violence in a different way, and they have to transform themselves to survive. And often I felt like I could, when they walked into the room where we were doing poetry, I could see them physically relax because they didn't have to be those people anymore. And the very first week, I shook all of their hands to say hello.
Yeah.
And at the end of the scheme that we were doing, at the end of my time there, one of them said to me, as I was leaving, he said, "When you shook my hand, that was the first time anyone had touched me for months." So that physical contact, so I'd just done that as one human being to another, but it meant a lot. I'm still processing what happened in that place and what it taught me about masculinity and men.
Now, there are some love poems, really, aren't there? Are they love poems in this collection, or are they poems that are, I don't know, they felt like love. There are some that feel like love poems to me anyway. These are not all men who you were ever going to marry. That's maybe an obvious point to make, but it's not like a list of old boyfriends or whatever. It's encounters with men of various types, but sometimes they are people that either you had a relationship with, or there was a certain wistfulness about the memory of this person. And I wondered if you could read one of my favourites in that category, which was number 34. It's such a well-known fact that you're a trumpeter, and this kind of makes reference to that, doesn't it?
Yeah, so, well, the All the Men I Never Married, number 34 in here is a teacher who there was definitely no romantic things with at all.
Yeah.
But, I think the love poems, I like to think of them as poems of desire. So it's kind of characterised by lack of.
But that's interesting, isn't it? Because desire, love, I sort of think love hasn't necessarily got to be romantic love at all. It can be the love of a teacher. It can be the love of, someone you empathised with or felt sorry for or knew a long time ago or whatever, without it being romantic necessarily. I suppose that's what I meant. Desire, well, that sounds more romantic to me than love.
Yeah, well, not this one, a poem of desire, but I think I that point of the men, some of the men are ex-boyfriends and some of them aren't. I wanted to play around with this idea. I mean, the title is a bit of a Mickey take, really. I'm kind of poking fun at this notion, which my parents definitely still have, that women and men can't be friends. It's either you're going out with a man or that's it. And they cannot understand, one of my best friends in the world is an ex-boyfriend, is someone I was with when I was 18. Huh. And I've known him basically my whole adult life. And my mum still finds that really odd.
Oh, really?
So I'm kind of messing about with that notion that, of course, there are different types of relationships between men and women. And sorry, I'm getting off track.
That's fine. No, it's fine. It's fine.
So this is All the Men I Never Married, number 34. I clip the mic to the bell of my trumpet, set my shoulders into a frame that will hold the trumpet steady, hold it true, take a breath, draw myself into my body. I am still, like sand coming to rest in a glass of water. Nobody taught me this. No man could put this into language. Not my teacher, arriving for lessons on his motorbike, long hair streaming behind. Unheard of where I was from. A man with a hair bobble. Just imagine. He taught me the word gig. I didn't know what it was. Thought it was something like a jig. Some grand adventure. He taught me many things. How to be always on the road. Rushing between one thing and another. My first paid gig at the Haymarket Theatre. He taught me to watch the conductor. To mark up the parts with cues. Run to the bar and save his place. Said, if in doubt, blast it out. And no such thing as an uncertain trumpet. That you could do something you loved and live. That this life, though not lifting, carrying, wiping, cleaning, that this life was work.
It says a lot in the last few lines, really. A life that's not lifting, carrying, wiping, cleaning.
Yeah, it was the first time I realised you could make a living from something that you loved and something that wasn't hard physical graft, which is what all of my family do and did. Yeah, again, it's like going back, and I didn't set out to find that out. I found that out in the writing of the poem. I wanted to write about this person because they were important to me, but I hadn't quite worked out why they were important, apart from just teaching me how to play the trumpet.
Yeah. It's a lovely tribute. So you put this collection together. This was your PhD thesis, basically, was it? Or presumably you wrote the book and you had to write a huge sort of piece about the process of writing the book.
Well, that's traditionally what you do in a creative critical PhD, but I went off piste a little bit because I think they've got a lot more flexible now. So it was most of the poems that are in the book, not all of them because I wrote some of them after, but so most of the poems in the book, but split into small groups of poems and then interrupted by what I thought of as like lyric essays. And the whole thesis was set out like a choose your own adventure book. So you would read a group of poems, which again, it was me kind of poking fun at academia and the literary establishment. I grouped them into like headings like poems of desire, a mode of attention, and just to kind of Mickey take, and showed them to my supervisor because I want, when a poet says this poem is about blah 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 in a reading, and I get really cross because I'm like, don't tell me what the poem's about, I'll decide that. So I was like, right, I'm going to annoy the reader deliberately by going poems of desire, a mode of attention, and then maybe put a poem that doesn't straight away fit into that group, so that the reader's constantly going, well, why is that here and not in this group? But anyway, at the end of each group of poems or prose, you get like a couple of choices. So if you would like to read about sexism as a slippery and fluid term, turn to page blah, blah, blah. If you want to read poems in a landscape of violence, turn to page blah, blah, blah. So it's kind of making the reader more active. So that was my thesis. If I'm talking, to my mum and dad, it's a choose your own adventure book. If I'm talking in academia, it's a reader directed text.
Okay, and this went down well, presumably. So
yes,
you got there in the end. But I like
it. Worked, it
worked, and I like the idea of the lyric. I'm sort of sad that the lyric essays and some aspects of that didn't find their way into this book in a way.
Well, I'm doing a book of essays with Seren, and it's basically going to be that thesis, but changed a little bit.
Well, this is a very nice segue into my question of what are you working on now, or what have you got coming out, or what are you, what's the future holding?
Yeah, so I've been working on this book of essays, basically. So it's kind of my thesis, but it's a book of essays kind of poised between memoir, academic essay, personal essay, and there'll be some poems from this book kind of interspersed. So my thesis was looking at experiences of sexism, but then also I'm looking at experiences of performing as a female poet and talking about various things that have happened, and then how those experiences of performance and audience reactions then fed into the work in different ways.
Oh, well, that sounds really exciting. So
that's coming out next March for International Women's Day, hopefully, if I get my edits done in time.
Yeah. And are you doing your festival again? You're a famous festival organiser. We need to know what's happening on that front.
Nothing as of yet, because, we've just finished running the Kendal Poetry Festival this June, and it was a hybrid festival.
Oh, okay.
And it went really well. It was we got great feedback from everyone. The hybrid bit of it went really well, but we're absolutely exhausted. I'm saying me and my co-director Claire Shaw, we're absolutely knackered.
I'm not surprised. I mean, it's a huge amount of work, isn't it?
Yeah, I was really, really very ill afterwards.
Really?
It was too much. So we're kind of having a stock check. Is that a right word?
A rain check.
Stock take.
A
rain check. That's what I mean.
And a stock take.
Again, I'm getting on my soapbox a little bit, but I really think hybridity is important, especially for festivals. I think they should be hybrid.
Okay.
But I don't think the literature sector yet is geared up and realises what a massive amount of work it is to do it properly. Because, this is my 5th festival, so it's not my first rodeo, but this one was 10 times harder and more intense and not possible for 2 people.
No.
We did have a third person for 20 days that we got funding for, and even that was still, it was unmanageable. So I think more funding needs to be put in, basically, to do it properly, so that the online audience, a lot of the time people do hybrid stuff and it feels like as an online person you're just forgotten about.
A sort of add-on.
We tried so hard not to do that. So we had one of the team always on the online feed talking to people in the interval and speaking to them afterwards and in the chat, and so everyone felt really included. But that's really heavy.
That's good.
It takes a lot of, I was going to say manpower.
Person
power.
Person power.
So I don't know. So watch this space.
Excellent.
I probably, when I've forgotten about the trauma, I would probably just do another one, because that's what happens. It's like giving birth, doing a festival.
Is it?
You just forget about it and think, I'll just do that again. It wasn't that bad. It didn't hurt that much.
Well, Kim, I really wish you best of luck with your book, and it's been so great having you on. Thank you for sharing all this and your time.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
So that was interesting with Kim Moore. I must admit I had a deep sense of trepidation at the idea of a book called All the Men I Never Married. I thought we were in for some kind of forensic account of all the way that men are completely despicable.
Well, that's interesting, because I did say to Kim at the beginning I wasn't quite sure what to expect by reading the blurbs on the back.
Yeah.
I read those before I started the book, and I wasn't quite sure either.
I didn't need a tin hat, because I think, she was actually very generous and empathetic about men.
Absolutely. And she pointed out, didn't she, the title is a bit of a piss take, really, of course. But
yeah, sort of almost goading academics, which is quite fun in itself.
Oh, I knew that would appeal to you.
So that first poem that she read, the one that had the we in it, she was almost she talked about the uneasiness of talking on behalf of all women being so various. But there was that great sort of mythical feel about it. I really liked it. Was, the way she was describing, witchy, other sort of women, animalistic, hobbled like horses, I think she said, and being ordered about. And then there's this thing, yes, there are giants among us, just felt like a real affirmation that actually, this is these otherized, downtrodden people were going to, it was like the onset of a rebellion somehow.
Yes, and it had this, as you say, it had this lovely mythic feel, and you got the impression, wow, this is a big topic, but then I loved the way it straight away went into specific individual incidents and portraits, and
yeah, I like that end. I sort of wrote it down, dragging the snare and the wire behind us. That all those kind of things that are holding you back, that somehow striving away from it. So in a way that felt like a really kind of rallying call, very feminist affirmation. As a man, I found that really quite bracing, just the sheer vigour of it.
That's good. I'm sure that was the intention. The fact that you pointed out that last line of that poem, dragging the snare and the wire behind us, one turns the page, and the very first poem, number 1, starts with the line, "There was the boy I met on the park who tasted of humbugs and wore a mustard yellow jumper." So straight away you're into a different register. Yeah, I'm glad that poem didn't end up at the end. I think it was right to put it at the beginning.
Yeah. No, I did as well. The numbered poems all seem to be kind of examples and pieces of evidence, rather than concluding with that poem, which is the rallying cry, start with it, and these are the reasons, I think.
Yeah. No, actually, you're right. Pieces of evidence. It was a bit like that by calling them numbered.
Yeah.
It was a bit like, Exhibit 1, Exhibit 24, or whatever. Interesting.
That pair of prose poems, with the sort of golden man lounging around in bed and women pouring themselves over him like water, and as if he'd been touched by Midas, at the end. And then that whole thing about, somebody afterwards in the next poem coming up and mansplaining why it wasn't quite good enough.
Yes, it's very, very clever, wasn't it? Juxtaposing those two poems in that way.
I have to say, I've had the mirror of that, actually, having read poems and women coming up and explaining why they're not good enough. So I don't think it's exclusively men that do it.
Oh, well, that's good to know. Is that good to know? In a way, it's good to know. Dear.
But I think there's a difference in tone, really, because the two times that's happened to be women, it's been done in a very caring way, as if,
oh dear,
kind of nurturing, but also deeply patronising at the same time. But but that phrase that you picked up on about the hands like two dead moles hung on a fence, that's such a brilliant image, isn't it? I love it.
You can tell her sort of contempt just through those phrases, can't you, at the end? Very, very good.
But she was threading through about, I thought it was interesting, because I'm always interested in silence and this idea that silence can be a resistance or a tool.
Yes. Yes, that was interesting, wasn't it?
Yeah, I love that bit. And that kind of awkward poem about going for that silent ride in a car with somebody that she wouldn't speak to, and he couldn't think of anything to say, and they ended up at McDonald's.
Yeah, and then years later he goes back and apologises. I mean, that is so true, isn't it? I can think of episodes in my past, if I ever had to face those people again, I'd say, I'm really sorry, but actual fact, that wasn't the point, was it? They weren't connecting anyway. Yeah. So as she said, he hadn't done anything wrong in that sense.
I don't know. I felt a bit toe curled by that, but in a good way,
Well, it's interesting to hear a man's take on it. There are some really harrowing testimonies in the book from women who've been through rape and other acts of violence, and
I think I'm right in saying her book, The Art of Falling, was really focused on, violence within relationships.
Right.
So there is that strand in her work that is very dark, in a way that what we heard was kind of perhaps some of the lighter side, or less dark.
Yes, and I think I asked her to read those.
Yeah.
I shied off going to the darker places, but certainly, yes, the book is more comprehensive, perhaps, than we gave the impression in the few poems that I got her to read.
Yeah. The poem about the guys in the prison, that just that god-awful, horrid, violent environment, and then the escape of, going to the poetry room and,
yeah.
In a way that you could read that metaphorically as, the violence and horribleness of the world, and, we all creep off to our poetry rooms and, show softer side of ourselves, perhaps.
Yes, but then with the added sort of irony of these are men who have committed violence.
Yeah.
We don't know what exactly, and presumably she didn't know exactly, but she said it was a category B prison. So that's the sort of subtext, isn't it?
Yeah.
No, I thought it was very interesting.
Yeah, you pointed to this thing about, the hand on her back, and she talking about the situation afterwards, she was saying that she actually felt really protected when she was there.
Yeah.
Just kind of counterintuitive, but really great in a way, And that sort of ending up with this idea that in that poem about the trumpeter, that life was work, and that, that joyful discovery that if you find something you love doing for your work, that is such a glorious thing. And that whole thing about never knowing the word gig before, I just really like that.
Lovely. It was lovely, wasn't it? And yes, and then we're back to the sort of the affirmation and the of the first poem in a way, isn't it? Women finding that they can do work that isn't women's work.
Yeah.
And breaking out of that and being a giant.
Yeah. Well, I think she's sort of quite giantish, really, Kim Moore. I think I really, really enjoyed those poems that she read.
It's been great to have her on here, I think, and there's a lot of love out there for our Kim.
Yeah, quite rightly. I'm sending her some right now.
We're back, aren't we, Peter? What the heck? Season 3 of Planet Poetry. Did we ever think it would get this far?
No, not in our wildest dreams, but it's really good to be back, isn't it? And
it is.
Thinking about poetry and reaching out to all our poetry chums via the podcast.
Yes.
So how was summer for you? Was it full of incident? And
we don't tend to go away in the summer like a lot of people, because we live on the seaside. So we live in a seaside town. So it's really lovely to be here over the summer. But what did we get up to? Nothing terribly momentous. Not like you. I know you've been moving house and all sorts.
Trying to move house, yeah. We had to move out of our house, and then because of all kinds of complicated reasons to do with the people we were buying from being unwell and things, had to spend 4 weeks in exile living in Ashford, which is where I am at the moment.
Yes.
And we snuck in a cheeky holiday in Greece as well. Did you read anything exciting of holiday?
I've been working my way through a few things, like Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, which I won't talk too much about, really. We've had enough Dante and Chaucer, haven't we, coming out of my mouth lately? But I'm enjoying the old Ye Olde Chaucer. It's a very nice sort of modern English translation.
Yeah.
And it's very entertaining. So there's that sort of, I've been dipping in and out of working my way through that. Then I've got various other things that I sort of pick up, mostly by my bedside, that sort of in piles. And there's the kind of the very challenging pile, and then there's the medium challenging, and then there's the sort of fairly, not easy reading, but easier, accessible stuff. So I suppose I've got things in different piles, but I've enjoyed, of those 3 categories, what I call the slightly easier, more accessible is Helen Dunmore, Inside the Wave. I've read Helen Dunmore novels, but I've never read any of her poetry, and I sort of thought that I must dip into that. And I've really enjoyed this collection. I think it may have been her final collection, but there are poems that refer to her treatment for cancer, and I like the way she works with that cancer's such a sort of cliche in poetry, you know. We've all had a bit of cancer, so when a cancer poem pops up, my sort of alarm bells go a little bit like, is this going to be a different take on it? What's this got to offer? So I'm a bit sort of demanding, but I really liked her writing. In the sort of medium pile, we've got England's Green by Zafar Kunial.
Ah, yeah.
Now, I absolutely loved his first collection, Us. And so I was looking forward to ordering this. So this is new. This is his latest book. But so far, I'm really enjoying it. And I suppose I put him in the medium pile because, yes, he is challenging and he's got a fabulous range of references. So you know, he asks the reader to do some work. But I just love it. He's such an original take. And in fact, I think what's said in the inside of the jacket is just about sums it up. Zafar Kunial is a proven master of taking things apart, polishing the fugitive parts of single words, of a sound, a colour, the name of a flower, and putting them back together so that we see them in an entirely different light, which sounds a bit like a surgeon or something. It's not quite like that. It's very playful, but it's very thoughtful. And I love his wordplay and
anything that can make you look at something afresh again is clearly something that works, I think.
And also very clever, very entertaining. I have to look things up, but not in a bad way. You know, he's got a series of poems inspired by the Brontes in here, and on the difficult pile, I've got this book, Pilgrim Bell by Kaveh Akbar, American poet. I started reading this and thought, this is going to be a bit hard work. But after about 6 pages in, I just had one of those moments, you know, when you sort of think, oh my God, this is a real poet. You know, I found a real poet. And I don't know what it is. It's not, I can't put my finger on why. Do you know what I mean? You have that feeling, you start reading and you're thinking, this is just this is it. This is what poetry is supposed to be. Yeah. It's exciting. It's exciting to have that feeling. But consequently, it is challenging. I've got it in my challenging pile, so I'm working through it slowly because you just can't skim it.
Well, yeah, that's good sometimes. I find sometimes the poems you have to, or poets you have to struggle with are the ones that do stay with you because you've kind of been forced to get your gloves off and get to grips with them in a way that if it's just yields itself fairly easily, then you just skim over it and think, yeah, that was pleasant.
That's a very good way of putting it. Yeah, it forces you to take your gloves off and really get into it. It kind of engages you in a way that is memorable, and it just feels like something for me. If it feels like something that I could never have written, or I could never imagine writing, but wish I could, then that's the most exciting thing, really. So.
Yeah, well, if it seems to come from a mind that's very different from your own, I mean, that's just really exciting, isn't it? To be able to glimpse a different way of thinking about stuff.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah. I Googled him and I found a very interesting interview with him on YouTube. Well, there are several, but there was one conducted by somebody at the University of California, Berkeley. So it has it's a little bit academic.
Yeah.
But it's really revealing and interesting, this interview. I would refer people to that. And that's published by Chatto. Oh, I should say Zafar Kunial, England's Green, is from Faber. And Helen Dunmore, published by Blood Axe, interestingly. I think all her books came out with Blood Axe. What about you, though, Peter? What has been floating your boat lately?
In the high summer, I was in Greece. I went twice this year, which was amazing. And the first time I was reading the Axion Esti by Odysseus Aletis, which is an old book published in the 50s, I think, which is really held up in Greek literature as being something almost equivalent to The Wasteland in terms of its import.
Really? Gosh.
A lot of it's dealing with the poet's kind of wartime experiences and also feelings about Greece and so on. I've read it several times before, and I was just dipping into that. But there's such evocative things about, describing the Greek landscape that when you're in Greece and reading Greek poetry, as I've said on several occasions, it just gives you that whole kind of glimpse under the shell into the soul of the place in a way.
Well, I love the way you talk about Greece and Greek poetry. It does make me want to go. I've never been to Greece.
Oh, have you not? Oh, wow.
I guess I never had to go there for work. It's never appealed to me because I'm not a big fan of Greek food. It's ridiculous, isn't it?
Yeah.
What a reason. But so I liked to hear you talking about Greek poets.
Funnily enough, this is the first time we'd been there for about 3 or 4 years. And the first person I spoke to in Greece said, "Oh, England always makes me think of history, but Greece makes me think of eternity."
Gosh.
Which was she was like a
wow.
work for the travel industry there, and I just thought I have to write that down. It's absolutely brilliant.
Philosophical.
Another thing I have been dipping into poetry for future podcasts. So I've been kind of reading the stuff of people we're about to interview or have interviewed.
Yes.
But I've also read this book by Robert Macfarlane called Underland, and it's a prose thing, but he's exploring underground spaces. So he's like squeezing into long lost caves, and it's all about sort of hidden cities and places under the world that kind of harbour pools of deep time and finding cave art and contemporary spaces. And it's beautifully written, very poetically written as well.
Is he a travel writer or sort of creative non-fiction, travel, nature?
I'm just looking at him on screen at the moment. He's best known for his books on landscape, nature, place, people and language.
Gosh, that's a big spectrum.
Yeah, he's got several books, but Underland is his most recent.
Oh, I like the sound of that.
It's up for all kinds of prizes and things, but yeah, beautifully written. So, apropos of kind of nothing, I was thinking about nonsense recently. Think of these words, Robin: chortled, galumphing.
I'm thinking.
Yeah, they're words that first were invented by Lewis Carroll, and which first appeared in the poem Jabberwocky.
Oh, is that right? Chortled.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems like a lot of the language in the poem seems to be kind of like chortled is like chuckled plus snorted in a way. It's sort of that sense of...
Oh, right, yes.
You can see where he arrived at the...
Yeah, sort of neologism sort of thing.
Yeah. The thing that got me fascinated by this nonsense poetry some time ago was I had a friend who thought The Hunting of the Snark was the finest thing ever written in the English language. This is pub argument starter. But, he was really keen on this kind of stuff. And in the dim and distant past, I read a book by this guy called Jean-Jacques Le Cercle called Philosophy Through the Looking Glass, Language, Nonsense, Desire. He sort of looked at language that strays away from meaning. And so, one of the things he looked at was Lewis Carroll and so on. What's interesting about it is, like, you read Jabberwocky, it sort of makes a kind of sense.
Yeah.
You've got some idea of something going on, even though a lot of the words that are used are just kind of nonsensical.
Yeah.
Probably I'll just read it because it's very short. But,
yeah, I do.
Because the structure of it linguistically is quite... just seems like English. It seems very logical, and that's that contradiction with something that sounds perfectly plausible filled with kind of crazy words. I find that really quite exciting. So I think this was first published it was actually appeared in Alice Through the Looking Glass. So it was a poem in the text of the children's story.
Right.
And apparently he wanted to print it sort of in mirror writing, but it was too expensive to do that.
I love that.
So, Jabberwocky. 'Twas brillig, and the slithy toves did gyre and gimble in the wabe. All mimsy were the borogroves, and the mome raths outgrabe. Beware the Jabberwock, my son, the jaws that bite, the claws that catch. Beware the Jubjub bird, and shun the frumious Bandersnatch. He took his vorpal sword in hand. Long time the manxome foe he sought. So rested he by the Tumtum tree, and stood awhile in thought. And as in uffish thought he stood, the Jabberwock with eyes of flame came whiffling through the tulgey wood, and burbled as it came. 1, 2, 1, 2, and through the vorpal blade went snicker-snack. He left it dead, and with its head he went galumphing back. And hast thou slain the Jabberwock? Come to my arms, my beamish boy, O frabjous day, Callooh Callay, he chortled in his joy. 'Twas brillig, and the slithy toves did gyre and gimble in the wabe. All mimsy were the borogroves, and the mome raths outgrabe.
Oh, that's brilliant, Peter. I love the way you read that.
It's good fun, isn't it? But I've read poems by, say, J.H. Prynne or other writers that I found less meaningful than that.
It's funny, as I was listening to that, it reminded me of reading, we're back to Chaucer, of reading Chaucer, in the Middle English, and you're sort of, it reads perfectly naturally, and every now and again you're thinking, not quite sure what that word is, but because it is sort of English, you sort of go with the flow, because a lot of the words are the same. So you're not, it's not an entire foreign language. So I like that. So, Jabberwocky, so it could have been written in some early form of English, reimagined.
I think that's actually how he started it, was he was doing a pastiche of kind of old English poetry.
Right. Totally get that, yeah. I didn't realise it was embedded in, did you see it was Alice Through the Looking Glass?
Alice Through the Looking Glass, yeah.
I didn't realise that. I thought it was a standalone poem. I mean, it became so famous, didn't it? I mean, even the first line or so, a lot of people can quote.
Once Alice has read this poem, she says, it seems rather pretty, but it's rather hard to understand. Somehow it seemed to fill my head with ideas, but only I don't exactly know what they are.
That sounds like how we talk about some of the poems that we've read, doesn't it? We're not quite sure what's going on, but we're having a good stab at it.